Hello everyone, and on behalf of Cuts International, it is a pleasure to welcome all of you to this important discussion on practical mechanisms to protect children data. I am Amol Kulkarni. I'm Director Research at Cuts International, and on behalf of uh, the organization, I welcome you all for this important discussion. It is pertinent to note that this discussion is happening when celebration of a representative democracy in terms of ongoing parliament session is going on. And we are grateful to Dr. Amar Patnaik and Mr. Gaurav Gogoi, members of parliament who have taken time from their busy schedule to participate in this discussion. We are also grateful to other members of the panel, Mr. Brijesh Singh, IG, Maharashtra Police, Mr. Deepak Tewari from Privately SA, Ms. Janice Verghese from Cyber Peace Foundation, and Ms. Aditi Chaturvedi from Koan, who have agreed to share their expertise on the subject. Such diverse panel is expected to highlight different relevant perspectives on this issue, which is relevant for a vibrant democracy like India. Now, India is not only the largest democracy, but also one of the youngest democracies in the world. And the importance of technology for our country cannot be understated, particularly as we emerge from a ravaging COVID pandemic. The Prime Minister has already declared the ongoing decade as decade. It is in this context of requirement to uphold democratic values of participatory decision making amidst growing use of technology, particularly by young users, that we are having this discussion. A substantial number of internet users, around 40% in total, are below the age of 19 years. It is of utmost importance that we ensure online well-being of such young users. While the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is being discussed currently, has its heart at the right place, it seems to promote the broken pathway of parental consent in this regard. Such an approach may not only be impractical in a country like India, wherein service providers operate with a mantra of catching them young, but in a situation wherein most young users are digital natives and often introduce their family to digital technologies. Therefore, the need for parental consent in each situation may also raise privacy concerns. The bill also treats all users below the age of 19 similarly. Such similar treatment of dissimilarly placed individuals could also lead to several concerns. Ultimately, we need to go beyond good laws and good intentions to understand what practical mechanisms can exist and can be adopted for ensuring safe online experience for young users. In this true spirit of democracy, we also need to understand the perception, expectations, and requirements of these young users, as well as perspectives of their parents to design policies and practices to keep young users online safe. And this is what we at Cuts intend to do. We are launching a nationwide initiative to interact with young internet users and their guardians to understand their perspective on their issue with the aim of filling the void which currently exists in the policy and practice space in this regard. We hope that this discussion will help us fine-tune our strategy and take forward the interactions. With these opening remarks, I would like to hand over the proceedings to Mr. Deepak Maheshwari, distinguished fellow Cuts, who will also moderate the discussion. Thank you once again, everybody, and over to Mr. Maheshwari.
Thanks, Amol, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Cuts and on my personal capacity, I would like to welcome all of you, especially Dr. Amar Patnaik and Mr. Gogoi, who members of the Parliament, both of the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha respectively. And despite the fact that we have a very busy Parliament session going on at this point of time, they have very kindly agreed and also taken out time to be with us at this point of time. Now, when we are looking at this whole issue about the data protection and children, now we need to look at broadly three different aspects. One is, of course, the digital ecosystem itself, how it is evolving in the country, and where we are finding the children in that particular space. So we started, of course, in 1995 with the internet services, and so next month we'll have the 26 years of that journey. And then we had mobile phones also started on 31st of July 1995. Again, we are about to celebrate that 26 years also. So in India, the internet and mobile actually, technically and practically happened within a span of 15 days exactly. So 31st July 1995, we had the first mobile call. And on 15th of August 1995, we had the first public internet service in the country. So that's one aspect. And at the same time, when we look at the demographics of the country, what we observe that so much of young people in the country, and as Amol mentioned earlier, many of them are digital natives, but many of them are not even digital natives. Their families are also not digital natives. So we do have access deficit. We do have connectivity challenges there also. So there could be situations when people have devices, but they don't have services. There could be situations when people have services. So the network is available, but they don't have devices. But there are also situations when people have both the services as well as devices, but still they do not know how to use those things in a proper manner. And in this whole quagmire, what is happening is that often when an adult drives a car, typically they are the ones who are expected to use a child lock. But the situation in the digital scenario is almost reverse. When people have even a smart TV and they want to have a child lock, most of the adults don't know how to operate the child lock in the TV, and they actually depend on the children how to do it. When it's an issue of parental consent, for example, it could be about school exam, it could be about vaccination, for example, it has been announced now, or any such thing. Or even simple thing like configuring or starting a new phone, or maybe setting up a new social media account on a phone. Oftentimes, adults, parents, even teachers for that matter, often depend on youngsters. Please help me how to go about doing these things. And when that is the situation, not only children are typically ahead of the adults in terms of technological savviness, but at the same time, they are also extremely vulnerable because they are also very malleable psychologically. Now, when we are looking at the age getting, for example, 18 as an age in the country for majority, the fact is, yes, we do have the Indian Majority Act, which is almost 150 years old now. But we had a whole lot of other legislation and different type of ages exist for different scenarios. And even today, whether it's for marriage, so for boys it is 21 and for girls it is 18. For voting itself, it is 18 now. But when I was in school, it used to be 21 those days. And many other scenarios, the ages actually differ depending on the type of maturity that one is looking for. And that's one scenario. But very specifically, when we are looking at children in this scenario, I just want to cite two things at this point of time. One, under the Indian Penal Code, after the 2013 criminal law amendments, and also in the recent changes in the POCSO, what we have observed that if a person above the age of 16, but still below the age of 18, which normally would be dealt as a juvenile, for heinous crimes, they would be and could be treated as adults. And that's how the criminal system is evolved now. So that's one scenario. The second thing is, it was almost 40 years back that the Central Film Certification Board, which we normally call it as Censor Board, they introduced a new category called UA. So earlier we had categories U, which was universal, and then there was a category A, which was adults. And this new category was introduced, and this was almost in the early 80s, by the way. And this category was UA. And what this category said, that in case anybody who is below the age of 18 can go and watch this type of movie, provided they are accompanied by an adult. That was the broad scenario. Now, a few months back, this year, on 25th of February, when we had this information technology rules, which were notified. Now, these rules, of course, they have got three broad provisions. I don't want to get into those rules as such, but there's one specific provision I want to bring out here, which is about the rating of the OTT content, the over-the-top content. And there, if you see, what has happened now is that we've got three new categories under the UA. So you got UA 7, we got UA 13 plus, and we've got UA 16 plus. So these are the three subcategories within the UA pattern overall. And this is within the realm of the digital space that we are talking about now. And in this context, what we wanted to discuss today was, how is the situation evolving in India, also globally, because many of these platforms, whether they are operated by overseas multinational companies, or for that matter, Indian companies that are also expanding overseas, how are these things impacting and how they should be interacting in terms of the law. And second thing was, more importantly, how practical are these things in practice? So yes, we can have something very interesting, and maybe very hard bound in terms of a law on the paper, but how practical are those mechanisms when it comes to implementation? How practical are those things when rubber hits the road? So with this is a broad context in which we want to have today's discussion. And the way we would go about this, let me just briefly mention about that. So we have requested Dr. Patnaik as well as Mr. Gogoi to initially speak for 10 minutes about each. And both of them have been members of the Joint Parliamentary Committee. And of course, we do appreciate that we are still waiting for the Joint Parliamentary Committee's report as and when that comes. But in the meanwhile, we know that both of you have been engaged in this subject and have been passionate about this subject, and your very presence shows us, I mean, that's the biggest evidence of that for us. So we just want to get your views on that. And after that, I would request Mr. Brijesh Singh, Janice, Deepak Tewari, and Aditi Chaturvedi to speak on specific aspects of these issues for about 7 minutes each. Followed by that, we'll have some questions and answers. Some people have already given some questions while registering for this particular event, but we'll also get some more questions and questions during the session as we go along. And some of those questions might come about just whatever you people say. I just have one request to all the people in the audience. That please type your questions not in the chat box but in the Q&A box. So that's one request I have, or maybe even in the chat box you can do that, but please keep them sharp, relevant, and short questions, because as a moderator I won't have the ability to read through very long questions at this point of time. And with that, I would first, if I can request Dr. Patnaik, and after that we'll come to Mr. Gogoi. Thank you. And I also request everybody else who is not speaking to please go on mute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak ji. Thank you, Amol, and thank you, rest of the members of the panel. My good friend Gaurav must be busy with the Lok Sabha. The action actually happens much more there, but I think in the last couple of days it's been in the Rajya Sabha that the action has been equally high and equally tense. You know, this topic relating to how to handle children's data is something which is really, really complex, because the categorization of maturity of children is too difficult as to whether the child, what is the context in which the child is grown. If the context is rural, then there is a rural-urban divide for the same age. If the context is, let's say, a child born and brought up in Delhi, and a child born and brought up, let's say, in Bhopal, a tier 2 city. So that is one such thing. The cultural context in which the child has grown, a child who was grown, let's say, in the northeast, and a child who was grown, let us say, in the western part of the country. Child was grown up in Kerala, and somebody who was grown up in Leh. So the context is very different, and since this context is very different and very complex, to apply a one-size-fit-all strategy of a fixed binary system, that if you are in this age group, you will be able to have access. If you are not in the age group, in fact, if you are in that particular data point, you will be able to access. And if you are not in the data point or that particular ceiling, or rather a floor, you will not be able to. You will be able to see it. So the complexity of fixing an age as the criteria to indicate the maturity of the child may not necessarily be the best metric. But then somebody could ask me the question, what could be the best metric? And very frankly, I have no answer. So the policymakers, the lawmakers who are involved in making law would also be grappling with this question. But for lack of any other thing, and also because it is simple, you can have a complex metric, but the idea is to make it simple. Somebody would not be filling up a huge form with a huge number of data just to enter in. there will be no interest to enter in them. Besides the other fact that you're collecting somebody who is providing the services is collecting a huge amount of data even before the access is being given, and no one knows how that data is going to be used, or what is the regulation would be there for use of that data, and when would it be forgotten, and all this kind of stuff. So therefore, I think I want to set this context that regulation of data of children, therefore, is very difficult. But in the best way, when you say that age is the metric that one could use, the best way could be a graded approach that we have been talking about, 16, 18. But how many such grades would you have? Because again, because of a 13-year-old in Delhi and a 13-year-old child in Malkangiri in Orissa would be having a different context in which they have grown up, different maturity levels. And to add to this complexity, the parents also are coming through that same context issue. So the considerations under which a parent gives the consent in Delhi for his child's access to the internet world may not be the same consideration with which a parent will look at giving access in some place in Kalahandi or some place in, let us say, in Gujarat or wherever. So the entire issue of when to allow the child to see is a sociological issue rather than a complete technical issue. Technology is I think is not that a difficult issue here. Managing a technology or having a technological solution to this is easier, but the sociological issue is much more difficult to handle. Whatever we do by common consensus on the law will face this problem as we do face in the implementation of other laws in this country. The second point that I want to bring in is the fact that even if in the United States they have this 13, 16, the European Union I think says it is the GDPR fixed 16 years as the threshold, and the United States Children's Online Privacy Protection Act fixes 13 years as the threshold. And we are, after the Nirvaya case, we have 16 to 18 for a different purpose altogether though. And the Contract Act says a different thing. So our regulations, the rules itself are varied in the country itself. So, and again, the purpose for which you have in the criminal jurisprudence, the age of delinquency having been changed from 18 to 16, and the person who is exercising adult suffrage having a different age is understandable because it's for different purposes. So we will, I think the best way would be to address this issue would be not to get out of the context. So in this case, the context would be, why would anybody, a child, get into the internet space or into the digital space? One, to access information, and we would expect the child also to use the information for innovation, for his learning, for his growth. Now, if that is the purpose, we know that for the growth of a child in normal circumstances, the role played by teachers and colleagues, teachers and friends is as much as the parents. Sometimes they spend much more time in schools. So to restrict it only to parents' consent is something which is not understandable to me. Of course, the issue again, I've already talked about the digital native and the digital migrant. But then what is the solution? To me, the most practical, and then of course the question is, if you are collecting data, so much of data to give entry to the child into the digital world, into the internet world, then how would the data be used? Who is going to safeguard the data? There's an additional complexity that a child, after 2 years, when he has become an adult, What is the migration procedure? What happens to the data he has already given when he was a child, but now an adult? Whether the provisions of the PDP bill, which talks about right to be forgotten, right to eraser, would apply to the data which he has already given as a child, or again parents' consent would be required to be taken. Now these are very complex things that would emerge, and this was very frankly were discussed also during the deliberations in finalizing the personal data protection bill. But when the purpose is, if we assume or if we accept that the purpose of a child to benefit from the digital world, from internet and everything that goes with it, is to collect information, is to collect knowledge for innovation, for his growth, for his personal growth, for his society, for contributing to the society, then instead of concentrating on the child's maturity, we should actually be concentrating on the maturity of the internet itself and maturity of the digital world. If we can keep why are we putting all these let's say thresholds? We are thinking of putting those thresholds simply because of the fact that we think that the internet is maybe having CSAM, maybe having pornographic stuff, maybe having stuff or knowledge or information which is not beneficial to the child's growth, that is basically content. So if we can improve or sanitize the content in the digital world as much as possible, then I think we would be solving half of the problem or majority of the problem. So the concentration should actually be, to my mind, to implement laws and regulations for sanitizing the digital world, sanitizing the internet, which would be which would have the impact of actually giving confidence to the parents. In fact, you may not have that. There may not be a necessity of putting that threshold anymore if we are very certain. When we are sending our children to schools, they are interacting with all kinds of people as their friends. We are not saying that you will only meet this friend, you will not meet that friend. What is happening is that the school, when we send him to a school, if we know that the children who are coming to that school are coming through a process which sanitizes the environment in which one's own child will grow, same thing applies here. So the thrust should be in improving the digital space, in improving the internet space, by the data fiduciaries, by the processors, by those who are collecting data, those who are processing data, using that info data for various purposes. We can't completely, of course, sanitize, but that process has to continue simultaneously till the best situation is reached when thresholds are removed. But till that time, we have to have something, and this is what the bill says, which is fixing it at a hard level. I still feel that a graded approach could be the best way out until we are in a position to give a complete full right to the child that he can enter into this world, and the percentage of or the risk of him getting content which is not beneficial to his growth is very minimal. I think that should be the ultimate goal of our entire protection of children's data. So that is one is the access of data. Once the children's data has been collected, protection of that data, that is, if it is to be used for various purposes, that is, identifying CSAM and all that stuff, that is another issue altogether, because that has to be addressed very, very sensibly, because those data could actually be, having a mixed data set with the parents' data also. So to handle that data, and as I said, whether the child will still have a right to erase after he becomes an adult, whether right to be forgotten an adult, because what we have written in the PDP bill is mostly data principal who is not a child, but as an adult. So I think that one aspect is very critical. Why I am saying all this is to convey the message that implementation of Section 16, Chapter whatever, Chapter 6 or 4 of the PDP bill would be Chapter 4, Section 16 would be a tough call. Would be tough call for data fiduciaries, for the Data Protection Authority, as well as for the government. But then we do the best possible situation by mitigating the risks to the extent possible and improving the ecosystem itself to such a level that the need for coercive measures to access and coercive measures to allow storage of children's data would reduce. The environment, parent, there will be no need for the parent to ensure that the content that the child is seeing is beneficial to his growth. While saying all this, I'm also deeply aware of the fact that it is very difficult to get into the internet and not requiring parental consent. I'm not really unable to give you a solution because the topic for today's discussion is practical mechanisms to protect children's data. And so it's really difficult for me to actually give a solution. I can only say what are the problems. And I only hinted at the long-term strategy that we could have towards improving the child's access to internet or to the digital world and how to protect his data. The PDP bill would be only one of the milestones in this process. It would, I'm sure, evolve over a period of time. Just as the context changes, when the educational levels of rural India or rural children matches with that of the urban children, when the educational levels all over India itself improves, when it matches, when the introduction of, let's say, education, sex education is introduced in every school in India, so, whether rural and urban, to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Now, these kind of, it's very easy for the Supreme Court, to say at a place, say it at Delhi that, if you don't want to watch it, why, just don't watch it. But that kind of maturity is not there for a person who is there in, some rural part of India and someone who is in the urban part of India. So those implementation complexities will remain. We will be depriving some bright minds to access the internet and help in innovation at a very young age by having this kind of regulations. I'm aware of that too. But then someone has to start somewhere. And I think this is the best possible solution. The better solution would be to make it a graded affair. So once it is a graded affair, then even if there is a denial of service to a particular age group for some time, he might graduate. He doesn't have to get denied of the services for a longer period. The way it is currently, if 18 and anything even 17, 16, 15 will not get any kind of access. But we could have a better method that if there is an error which has been done inadvertently to the child and by denying him the service, he doesn't have to suffer it for longer if it is a graded process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Patnaik, for this very comprehensive sort of expansion of this whole scenario in terms of being given this whole thing around that you started with complexity, with the context and the cultural aspect, and then obviously within that you have woven everything else also that you mentioned. Now, when we're looking at these type of things, so for example, in the UK, the Information Commissioner has come out with age-appropriate design codes last year. And this is basically a set of 15 voluntary standards. And broadly, the first one, by the way, says keep the best interest of the child. Okay. So that's the fundamental principle. And then, of course, everything else follows beyond that. So in this context, the other thing that you did mention, of course, was in terms of data fiduciaries, data process, everybody also has to be equally responsible. So when I requested Mr. Gogoi, you to sort of reflect on this, these issues, one of the other aspects that you may like to reflect on is the government itself is also a huge data fiduciary in different roles. So whether it's for schooling, for health, for census, or many other areas for that matter, or even train reservation or anything like that for that matter. And how do you see that these type of things should also be done not only by the private sector or the other organizations, but also perhaps the government, not only as a policymaker and a regulator, but perhaps here is a very fantastic case for the government itself to become a role model in terms of how to actually do these things in a proper manner. So over to you, Mr. Gogoi, this and of course many other issues and any other issues that you would like to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak ji, and thank you to Dr. Amar Patnaik ji for giving us a very bright opening statement. I agree that these days both the upper house and the lower house seems to be very dynamic. But coming to this issue, the way I want to approach this issue, like Dr. Amar Patnaik did, is that of a policy maker and kind of give the institutional perspective, and the institution being, as Deepak ji said, being the state, being the government, whether that's at the central level or at the state level. Now, when it comes to children as consumers, that trend of children being consumers of both mobile devices and internet content is just going to increase further. And COVID has been a great enabler or a multiplier in this, because of the urgency for digital education. Many states and possibly Government of India in the future will focus on digital education, and you have seen certain states, especially election going states, giving smartphones and computers and laptops increasingly more to children to bridge the digital divide. So in terms of consumers, you will reach this stage where between rural and urban, in terms of ownership of mobile devices, the gap which currently exists will only narrow. Currently in rural India, the child borrows the phone of the elder in the family, whether the elder sibling or the parent. But as smartphones will only become cheaper, as data only becomes cheaper, and as government itself is providing subsidized devices, I think the access to mobile devices and therefore the access to internet data is only going to increase. This trend will definitely be exploited by marketeers. I myself was in the marketing field for some time of a mobile service provider, and of course, I as a marketer, I completely understand that the way to a parent's wallet is through the child's mind and the child's insistence, and therefore you as a marketer, you try as much as possible to attract children and to as consumers and build upon them as future consumers of your goods. So there is going to be a lot of exploitation by marketeers, whether healthy or unhealthy, we can describe that later. At the same point, I think there is a lot of health data that is going to get, we will have a lot of data sets around health. That may not be such a bad thing. From rural India's perspective, where child malnutrition is quite rife, a child's body BMI and weight are already getting tracked through mobile platforms through ASHA community health workers, and certain state governments are doing that. And I think this kind of modeling and this kind of data capturing, especially of health, will only continue. And the positive aspect is that this data is mobile, is transferable. Your health data is not confined to the certificates or the doctor's report or doctor's prescription written in on paper in some file of some hospital in some house. It will be, in the internet, in the cloud, and it will be accessible. So this path of having health data of children for future diagnosis, I think, um, is is important, but again, it has pitfalls. And thirdly, it opens the door for criminals and illegal behavior. India is one of those countries, unfortunately, where child trafficking is a huge offense. Child pornography is a huge problem, and therefore those with intention to sexually abuse children, whether online or lure them through online platforms, will also will need to carefully study that, especially on the latter, which is on child sexual offense. As Dr. Patnaik mentioned, that the government of India has taken a very stringent perspective, and with the definitions in POSCO, you've also had a committee in the Rajya Sabha looking at child pornography and looking at uh, um, mobile devices and mobile platforms and apps. And you saw this committee engage with a lot of companies as well and submit a report, and that gives you uh, a view to what the government is also thinking, because such committees, such special committees which exist outside of the regular and the normal parliament standing committees, it happens rarely. The kind of institutional backing that the Committee on Child Pornography got, I mean, there are a whole lot of issues that can have a special committee be formed with the support of the government and the parliament. But since this one is there, I think it just indicates the attention of this government towards child sexual abuse, and you saw that in POSCO as well. And therefore, the corollary to this would be the capacity building of institutions. And if you look at crime from the perspective of crime, you have to build capacities of law enforcement agency, of police. How are they? What is their capacity to track cyberbullying? Not spamming, but when you steal someone's profile, when adults pretend to be children, when adults lure children. So how to keep the internet safe, or the online space, digital space safe from sexual offenses and child sexual offenders. I think there has to be a lot of capacity building that has to be built in the law enforcement agencies. They have to be very proactive rather than reactive. Rather than reacting on the basis of a crime or a complaint, they have to be very proactive in this. I kind of agree with what Dr. Patnaik said, although I frame it differently, or how I understood when he said you have to make the internet safe. The way I was saying it, that you have to create standards and guidelines for everyone. You have to create standards and guidelines for mobile devices or internet-enabled devices. These days, I don't want to restrict myself to mobile, because internet-enabled devices, they're Alexa is the internet-enabled device. A Chromecast is an internet-enabled device. So all internet-enabled device manufacturers will need to have guidelines with children in mind, child safety in mind. Platforms which children engage to for entertainment or education or messaging, those need to be, again, will need to have standards and guidelines. And every company might come up with their own way of enforcing those guidelines or that code, which Deepak ji also mentioned in the UK context. I mean, I like whether it's the ethical code or the guidelines, however you choose it. But it's important that device manufacturers, platforms and apps, as well as advertisers, online advertisers, have a set of guidelines. And then, once guidelines are whether infringed or enforced, there is an institution which is working with them on this as well. Now, whether that's the DPA or some other institution that we have to look at, or courts, that's a separate issue. But there has to be an institutional which is there with the accountability and the capacity to both enforce, supervise, and advise. And of course, I mean, parents are a key stakeholder nonetheless. Parents are a key stakeholder, and there's a lot of parent workshops or awareness building that has to be done. And my thing is that schools have to be are also a very important space for empowering children. After all, what is education? Education is about making a child self-aware and responsible, and that does not just happen through transactions of academic subjects. That happens through through discussions and debates and transactions on subjects or all aspects of child's life. So whether that is child awareness or on gender, child awareness on identity, child awareness on religion, child awareness on digital rights. I think there's schools as an institution or as an arm of the government, especially government schools, because private schools might do it, but especially government schools or government funded schools. There needs to be a space built for life skills curriculum. This is something that I've been saying for many years, that you need to have a space for life skills which touches all the aspects of child outside of their textbooks. And that's where the latest content, the latest curriculum, what is the world, what is India's saying, whether it's on gender or sexual preferences, positive sexual behavior, masculinity, feminism, religion, values, conflict resolution, all of that gets through that medium. And so you have to look at schools as well. And we have to also get out of this mindset that children need to be protected always. Children need to be empowered also. And through mobile devices, they can be empowered to overcome a teaching deficit that might exist in a rural school because of poor teacher attendance. They might be empowered to be more participative in democracy through citizen journalism and community-based discussions. They can be more empowered, again, as I said, through health as well. Look at, for example, Khan Education, an online educational tool which is being used, and this is it's technology is also cuts the divide. So the framework should not always be about protecting, but also look at from an empowering perspective. And I think especially when it comes to children, the role of the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Women and Child are very important, because they are the ones who have worked with children the most. They understand psychology, they understand the latest trends in education, they understand parents, they understand the different contexts that schools exist in across India, because schools is the institution which hold children for the longest time. Children are the most captive, not of the mobile, but of schools, and predominantly government schools. So, and therefore, by being there, there's so much of work that is happening in schools. And therefore, I feel like the role of Ministry of Education, Ministry of Women and Children are extremely important. I think we will always have a debate over definitions, whether it's the data protection, what is in terms of children, what is sensitive data, what is personal data, who is a child, who is an adolescent, who is a youth. We will have these definitions, and there will always be, I think, innovations. I don't think it's a very dynamic subject, definitions and guidelines. But I think this is a good debate to have. As Dr. Patnaik said, we might not have the solutions at the beginning, but it's a good debate to have. It's a good subject to be addressed, because this is the way our current society is headed towards. So, it's good to keep building consensus, identify the various issues, flag them, and come to a consensus that is, as the title said, is practical and viable in the Indian context. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gogoi. And as you just mentioned, that it is not typically just the particular ministry itself In fact, today happens to be exactly 11 years and 1 day. So on 21st of July 2010, I was sitting at CSOI on KG Marg in a meeting convened on the privacy legislation in India, called by not METI, not DOT, not NITI Aayog, or Planning Commission for that matter in those days. It was actually DOPT. And in fact, just yesterday, I shared that, that particular thing also about this on LinkedIn, about what happened and what has changed till now and what hasn't changed really. So many things are actually the same and many things have changed significantly. So
So you need a whole of government approach instead of it sitting it in a particular ministry. You need a whole of government approach.
Absolutely, and I think going forward, so that's as far as the institution is concerned. But I think overall, in terms of the actual impact, we have to have the whole of society and whole of the country approach, also building on the same thing that you mentioned in terms of the whole of the government. And it's not just the central government. I would say that IT actually has become some sort of a de facto concurrent subject in the country. That's why you have IT departments in every state also. So they also have their own some frameworks somewhere or the other. So with this, let me just move to Mr. Brijesh Singh. I've known him for a long time, and he's an engineer, but also more importantly, he is an IPS officer with a very great and deep experience both on the field as well as at the, I'll say, in terms of planning and execution of setting up cyber policing capacity, the centers and everything else across the state of Maharashtra. But not just Maharashtra, the fact is that he has also been helping many of his colleagues and his counterparts across the country over the years, especially in terms of tackling cybercrime. He has also established several public-private partnerships with the private companies. So I would like to ask him what type of challenges in particular. So obviously there are some generic challenges in terms of, let's say, jurisdiction and several other things when it comes to cybercrime. So that, those things are there. But especially when it comes to any cybercrime related to children in particular, or by children for that matter sometimes, what are the specific challenges that the law enforcement faces? And that's something I would like you to request, and I would request you also to sort of limit your intervention to about 7 minutes so that we have some time towards the end for some question and answer. Thank you.
Deepak ji, first of all, thanks for inviting me here. And wonderful interventions by Gogoi ji and Patnaik ji. Gogoi ji told us about the responsibility of the state and the approach the state is taking towards empowering the children in digital space. Dr. Patnaik also talked about a graded response to the contextuality of maturity regarding children. You have asked a very pertinent question about the difficulties that I encountered specifically regarding offenses regarding children, be it CSAM or be it any kind of offenses committed by children. Now, world over, we are facing the primary problem, which is called the going dark problem. While encryption is a wonderful thing, encryption is essential in defense, in intelligence, in law enforcement, in government, in running your financial services. But see, wrong users of encryption can result into ransomware, can result into sort of illegal trade of narcotics on Bitcoin, can result into using Tor for nefarious purposes. So it depends on what use technology is put to. So going dark problem is one problem that somewhere encryption and especially what is called as warrant proof encryption, it limits the capability of law enforcement to gather evidence. So even if you have metadata, people say that, oh, you have metadata, you can use metadata wherever you want. But see, metadata is not sufficient. In many cases, courts have said that where is the evidence of factual communication, of intent, of action. So without actual content, it is difficult to prove an offense. Let's say child sexual abuse material. If that material is not accessible, then it becomes difficult to prove a crime in the court of law. Now, I'll tell you something interesting that happened and something important that happened. So there's a body called NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the US, and they also have an international counterpart, which is sort of a voluntary collaborative framework wherein all these social media giants have got together and they are filtering and passing on violations of their policy, as well as cases where child sexual abuse material or child pornography is uploaded on the internet. It's a wonderful initiative. And way back when I was handling cyber, just for 3 months, we got 1,700 cases from NECMEC about child sexual abuse material from NECMEC through Delhi, MHA. Now, this is a very small portion, and you don't know where all it is happening. So you do not have any real-time mechanisms to prevent. So as police, as state, we should also be preventing our children from harm. We should be protecting them from harm. Not only this, and this is happening on various other things. There is content within games which is not appropriate for children. Children are being targeted with advertising, but specifically coming to crimes, if you want to investigate, one problem is going dark problem, that is warrant-proof encryption. Second is anonymization, that children are using obfuscation, anonymization techniques, and you know that they are digital natives. Once they are digital natives, they are smarter than us, at least in this regard. But not that they are more responsible or more aware. Now we have a catch-22 situation. Parents are not all that aware, and children are more aware but less responsible. Herein is the responsibility of the state to step in. We need to protect our children. Deepak ji, even if you go to a jungle, you know, a herd of animals takes precautions to protect its young. And we as humans cannot leave our children out in the wild west there, because everything is happening there, right from sexual predators who are grooming to people who are wanting to fleece them, to people who are targeting them with ads to empty the parents' pockets, to, you know, people who are changing their ideologies, radicalizing them, exposing them to you know, gruesome content which sort of changes their minds. So we will have to devise mechanisms to, first of all, prevent this. And you will have to have a transparency regarding what is being collected, how the data is being used, for what purposes being used. So the AP Shah committee had given you know, these 9 data privacy protection principles, which are reflected in the Puttaswamy judgment and worldwide also seen in GDPR. See, world over, be it the California Consumer Law or COPPA or the Convention on Child Rights, somewhere, wherever there may be differences of opinion regarding contextual maturity, but you said a great thing about the age-specific design, which the UK has promulgated, that the basic principle should be what is to be done is to be done in the child's interest. Now, if that intent is appropriate, then we can design technologies around that. We can design technologies for transparency. We can design technologies for early detection. We can design technologies for investigation. We can design technologies for finding abuse. Where abuse happens, where somebody is circumventing these measures, because children are going to circumvent. Like Mr. Patnaik talked about, you know, or probably you talked about smart TVs. So the children, you know, they know how to enable and disable these parental controls. So if parental controls can be enabled and disabled by children and parents are not aware of them, then it's very, very difficult to implement them. So somewhere we need to have regulation, and apart from regulation, how is this regulation applied? So you will need to have, let's say, create things like trust scores around services. And not only this, internet is becoming ubiquitous. Everything is connected. Toys are connected, right? Devices are connected. Mobile devices are connected, and you cannot. And internet has become a necessity for children, even for classes, for any socioeconomic class today. All classes after COVID are happening on Zoom or on video conferencing. So you have to also look at the school use of internet when children are using internet for school, and they're smart. They know how, right from deleting cookies to cleaning history to using software or proxies or VPNs. So somewhere we also need to, so parental consent and parental controls are important, but does the parent know what consent the parent is giving, or the parent, what kind of controls the parent should have? So somewhere there is a need, especially to make these things simple and usable, because you can't go on educating a large populace. So you can't go on an awareness drive which would cost you sort of millions of dollars just to make people aware by the time technology changes. No, you have to make technology easy. You have to make technology accessible. Even regarding consent, the terms of consent should be simple and somebody should be able to understand what they are agreeing for. It cannot be a complex thing running into 100 pages, which is just legalese. So I feel that legislation is essential, and enablement of the investigation agencies, both regarding technology, capacity building, capabilities, legal enablements, similarly interchange of data between different jurisdictions, maybe it across countries. I understand that we have not signed Budapest Convention due to various things, but we will have to somewhere have bilateral treaties or other means where we should be able to get data. Data localization coming in PDPR is being opposed by various people, but I think it is essential. Don't look at it as just as sovereignty. It's a strange country where even sovereignty is questioned. But so it be. It's a healthy democracy where everything is questioned. But question it. But don't start mistrusting sovereignty, because you are here because there's a country which exists. If the country won't be there, you also won't be there. So even if you look at data localization, it is really helpful for investigation. So I feel the way ahead is to have robust practices. We have to have a framework of law, is to have technology which is implemented everywhere. It's to have methodologies to detect and punish any violations, is to make technology easy and accessible both for children, for schools, for parents, and even for people who are making these services, games, toys, anybody. Ultimately, they are doing business. And if they are needing something to personalize services for the children, it cannot be blanket prevented by saying that no, below 18, you cannot collect any data. You will need to have a more educated, aware and granular approach to this. So these are my 2 cents.
Thank you. So one of the things that you mentioned was, for example, this ICMEC data and about this 1,500, let's say, incidents over the span of 3 months. Now, the fact is also that whether it's you or many of your other colleagues in India, or for that matter, anywhere else in the world, everybody says that when it comes to cyber crimes, the reporting of cyber crimes is extremely underreported. So that's another parameter that we see. So I just want to move to Janice now. So Janice, in the Cyber Peace Foundation, you have this outreach around sensitizing children and many of the other things that 3 of our speakers have already mentioned about those things. But also, one of the things that I want you to reflect, apart from the other things that you observe in terms of psychology or any other socio-economic challenges, is around why is it, even when people know that there's a particular type of problem which has happened, even when they know that, okay, there is a cybercrime police station or there's a cybercrime.gov.in portal and things like that, those type of mechanisms do exist. Why is it that the number of incidents that get reported are so low? Is it about they don't have confidence in the law enforcement capability, or let's say in terms of the having a reasonable expectation of a conviction in the court of law, or is it concerns around reputation or social stigma or anything like that, or what is it?
Firstly, thank you, Deepak, for inviting me, and it's a very enlightening experience for me. I've heard from some wonderful speakers, and I hope that I'll continue learning when I hear from the other speakers as well. So coming to the question, the biggest reason that we have come up, that we have understood rather from our workshops and all our outreach programs is the fact that children in most cases lack a support system. Parents do talk about, beta, if something happens, come to me. But when you practically talk about, let's say, a case of image-based abuse, you've sent a picture to a partner, somebody in a relationship with, or somebody you're very close to, and when the picture gets leaked, or when your partner, or when whoever you sent it to, when they start blackmailing you, your parents are not the first or even the last option to talk to about this, because they feel scared. We are the ones who sent the picture, and victim shaming, unfortunately, is a very big problem that is plaguing our society. I mean, rape victims get blamed for going out at wrong times. So this is a case of image-based abuse. Of course, the child is going to be blamed. So definitely, because there's a lack of support system, and because children get scared that our internet access may be revoked. So that is a bigger concern at this point. I mean, it may sound silly to us as adults, but for children, it's a very big concern. What if our devices get taken away? How will we play games? How will we stay connected? So these concerns do make it difficult for a child to open up about their problems. That's one challenge. Challenge number 2 is that I have great respect for law enforcement. We work very closely with law enforcement, but there have been instances where when victims want to report a case, they're not taken seriously. So it comes back to victim shaming. It comes back to not being aware of the law itself. Just recently, there was this case where 66A was still being used. Cases were still being registered under 66A. So the lack of awareness from a legal perspective is huge. So many times, even the officers who are receiving the complaint, they don't want to file complaints for multiple reasons. And the fact that we have to talk to law enforcement about investigation shows that there is a need for skill development. So that's just one out of million reasons, but that is a very important reason. Thirdly, children are not aware of the reporting mechanisms. There is your POXO e-box, there is your 1098 child line. There are organizations working to help children. We have our helpline, we receive hundreds of cases every day, but still it's a very small percentage of the actual cases. So nobody is really aware of the reporting mechanisms, and parents also, if they're aware, why are you telling everybody? Cops will come up and down our houses. What will people in the locality think? They have a lot of fear in their brains, probably because we as a society have kind of failed to, give them the support that they need. So as a family member, as somebody within a child's school, as a responsible member of society, and of course as stakeholders, providing a support system is the first step. Giving them the information, spreading awareness, I cannot emphasize, is very, very important. Of course, in a population with 1.3 billion, even if I spend my entire life training, I may not be able to cover even half the population. But it is something that we have to talk about. So spreading awareness, and specifically legal awareness, knowing when a crime is happening. There are so many cases where children have absolutely no idea they're victims of crime. So POXO very specifically, categorically says, if somebody sends a child sexually explicit material, it is illegal. The child has absolutely no idea. The child gets scared when they receive pornographic content. They get scared because of all the fears we spoke about earlier. They can't talk to anybody, and they end up getting victimized and abused. So spreading awareness on all these aspects is very important. And of course, as one of the speakers mentioned, talking about sex positivity is very important. Talking about all these things so that the child can make an informed decision and then engage in activities is very important. So that's what I think is the current problem. But if we deal on these, if we talk to children about these particular issues, I think we can increase the cases being reported.
Thanks, Janice, for this short and crisp sort of response. Let me now move to Aditi. So Aditi, by the way, Aditi is not just a lawyer. Earlier, she used to do coding also. So she's actually done engineering also. So she has an interesting mix of expertise of both technology and law with her. Now, as Brijesh mentioned, for example, that there are these challenges in terms of law. But when we are looking at the current formulation of PDP, that's the version that we have, of course, as was introduced in December 2019. And of course, Dr. Patnaik did mention about having some sort of a graded approach. But what are the other things that could be or should be considered when we are looking at developing this whole framework around protecting children's data? So for example, let's say there's an edtech company, and that edtech company will does collect information, and by default, by the way, okay, so there's no way that it doesn't. And then if that particular provision that, okay, no commercial organization can track the data, then obviously none of this might happen. And for that matter, similarly, perhaps even a profit-making hospital also might not be permitted to keep that data because, again, it's a commercial organization. So what are some of those safeguards and nuances which are needed to be baked in within this whole pie that we are calling the personal data protection framework, so that the children not only have a good taste of the internet, as was mentioned by Mr. Gogoi as well as Dr. Patnaik, but also they are also saved from any of the high calorie or bad stuff that may come from that type of consuming that type of pie.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, sir. So I'll just begin by bringing back the focus to data protection, because we have to be clear about what this law is intended to do. So our focus needs to be clear. It is not about content regulation, unfortunately, but this law will talk about control of data exploitation. And so while we will be concerned about, issues of what kind of content a child could be, exposed to, it could be sexually CSA material or anything, but I think it'll be very difficult to fix that through this. next thing is important, that yes, we do want to address, we have cultural differences. There are many differences, the urban and rural divide, but interestingly, we should always bring back a focus to what Sri Krishna committee mentioned, and it suggested that these laws are ultimately meant for full autonomous development of a child. I know these developments could be different. Some may be overwhelmed with the kind of content that is online, but again, our focus has to be, laws are visionary. They have to pave a way for the progress and development of children. So data protection laws will have to be aimed at that. And interestingly, also, we have some guidances. We had guidances from Supreme Court also, where they talk about privacy rights, and they talk about, even MITI's white paper has talked about, how critical right to privacy is. But importantly, even like what Janice said, that, we have a lack of support system. So internet essentially opens up, it has some benefits. It opens up a communication world to you, where it's easier for you to have conversations. So when children come from conservative societies, they could want to explore sensitive topics. It could be about, religious perspectives, or maybe some different kind of sexual orientations. So we need to keep this in mind when we actually create a mechanism where we want to have consent-related issues. Interestingly, the PDP only talks about, proposed PDP. It only mentions, gives exceptions in case of, services such as counseling. In that case, you don't need parental consent. But we have to really take into account what all nuances are there, what all children look at. And of course, Patnaik sir said, we need a sliding scale. We need to look at maturity of children. All that will go into it. But we must not forget the benefits that the internet can bring. Also, so coming to feasibility of implementing it, like, what all mechanisms are there. So maybe I would like to take your attention to, age appropriate content code. That is what UK has come up with. They have come up, it's a fairly recent code, and it came out in September 2020. And it has, it has age appropriate design code for practices for online services. It contains about 15 standards, and it talks about things like, privacy must always be high on default. It talks about not allowing, turning off geolocation services. It discourages use of nudge techniques. So these are interesting, they have really worked with developers. They have worked with the engineers, and, they have come up with these solutions in their code. And these are not hard coded into the legislation. So what they have done is the authority, the ICO, has been constantly guiding companies, and this we've seen in US also, but there's constant positive guidance by FTC in US or ICO in UK to figure out how we can at best make good critical technological intervention.
Aditi, you're on mute. You went on mute.
Oh, I don't know how I went. Sorry. Okay.
Yep.
I don't know where I stopped, but all I'm saying is that so these authorities provide a continuous guidance. And interestingly, what I felt was also that they have looked into practical issues of age verification also. So for example, our law also talks about, we have to have some degree of age verification, and require all websites, whether they direct their services at children or not, to have age verification techniques. But to make things easier, what we see is that in FTC, in US, they are particularly limited to those websites that have actual knowledge that, these services are being directed to the children, or in case where they're specifically directed at children. So it makes, the entire, it increases the chances of success of these mechanisms, right? So, and one more interesting thing I noticed in the law was that the meanings, meaning of best interest of children. Maybe these are not really defined as yet, but it will be interesting to get together, people from various disciplines and figure out what could be a best, what do they mean by best interest of children, right? Because it says 16.1 of our proposed law says that processing has to be in the best interest of children. Now, that's, again, it doesn't have to be in the law itself. It can be in a delegated legislation. And just to give an example, how UK has done about this is that it also mentions best interest, but it looks at, some guiding parameters like safety, health, it also mentions emotional development of children. So I think, these are very important aspects that we need to keep in mind. And again, like I said, so one thing we really need to take into account is that when we looked at, we recently did a very interesting exercise where we looked at privacy policies of different websites. We looked at websites from EdTech, gaming, matrimonial websites, and financial payments websites also. So, we see a very little focus on, children when it comes to privacy policies, right? And now this is probably there was just one website, or that one gaming website which mentioned it. But none of them paid attention to the children's issue in the privacy policies. And we also noticed one interesting fact is that some gaming websites also collect data in excess of what is required. For example, sexual orientation. They would collect medical records. Why is that required? Whether they serve the purpose for which they are really collecting the data is hard to assess, right? But on, these are some things that really need to be, taken into account. And perhaps we'll be able to figure out a good way to implement data protection.
Thanks, Aditi. So let me now move to Deepak. Now, Deepak is based in Geneva. He was earlier, of course, in India, and then and currently he's running a company called Privately. Actually, the company's name itself is Privately SA. And the interesting thing is that this company does have solutions for, let's say, age verification, age estimation, I would call it. I think that's what the term you use rather than verification, because obviously there's a certain, I'll say, probability of success and accuracy perhaps in these parameters. So having heard from different people about what the lawmakers are thinking about, what the law enforcement is facing the challenges, what the civil society is sort of looking into, and what type of legal provisions we have or we are likely to have, what are some practical solutions, not only from your company, but perhaps even from some other places that you would like to sort of share with us? So for example, recently I came across this, also one more thing. So Aditi, you did mention about ICO's AADC, which I also alluded to earlier. But just late last month, the E-Safety Commissioner, which probably is the first of its kind office anywhere in the world, in Australia. So my friend Julie, she has come out with a safety by design toolkit. Okay. So again, this is a help that, okay, this is how you can test your sort of devices, services, apps, etc., with respect to certain principles and certain expected outcomes. So there's again case studies, and in fact, Deepak and I both are members of an IEEE initiative where we have got case studies on many things related to children's online and offline experiences. So anyway, over to Deepak to share his side of the story and what some of the, and how these type of solutions are deployed, and what is the sort of level of confidence with which one can actually deploy these type of things.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you today. He's already given an introduction, so I can maybe start with talking a little bit in a level of detail about the age-appropriate design code, and then some of the other legislations and initiatives, for example, the one coming from the E-Safety Commissioner in Australia. Similar ones are coming in the US, but in a scattered manner. There is an EU consent coming up, but the perspective, or if we step back a little bit, there is a reason for all of that. Recent studies in the last 3 to 4 years have come out with a few numbers there. So 1 out of 3 users of the internet across the world is a child under 18. So first things first, right? And children go everywhere. So it's not that you have, whether it is pornographic sites, it is Bitcoin mining, it is from regions as diverse as, of course, so the entire omniverse of the internet is traversed by children. And the time that children spend online using these services is higher in general than what adults spend using these services. The given case in point is TikTok or Instagram, or many of these services, right? Now, if we consider all the principles behind, whether it is the age-appropriate design code or whether it is what Julie is talking about, is to make the internet a little bit more adaptive to the needs of children, knowing that in the absence of a proper verification and identification, the children are not restricted from going anywhere. Yeah, and in the past, across the industry, if you remember what's happening today, if you go to establish a new Facebook account, for example, they will ask you in Europe, they'll ask you, are you under 13 or over 13? If you say you're over 13, you're in. So from Facebook's point of view, they have signed the terms and conditions from you that if you have misappropriated or misstated your age, they are not legally responsible for anything more. So as far as many of these platforms are concerned, historically, they have pushed or shoved the responsibility behind T's and C's. This is also the reason of COPPA. And if you see COPPA in the US, the whole drive behind COPPA is that if you know that the subject is under 13, you treat their data differently. You do not collect the same level of data. You do not show them the same advertising. So when we are talking, of course, we are talking about every single industry, every single sector, but particularly if you talk about sectors like retail, I'm thinking about India as well. You have retail, people can order something online. Can they order restricted products? Think about gaming, think about loot box. And recently a lot of flack was given to one particular site called OnlyFans. Some of you might know about it. Very young kids, and some of them, at least in Europe, we've seen boys and girls, some of them as young as 15, 14, setting up a sort of pornographic channel, which they expose themselves to paying users. So it's in some sense, and they get paid. So it's all misrepresented. So it has become a very, very large way of sort of sexual services being peddled online. And they did put some measures in place around age verification, but there are still many problems there. So maybe with all that in the background, I would like to bring, with the age, the big problem in the industry is the following. Okay, in order to protect children, I need to know who is a child, right? In order to know who is a child, I need to collect data. So it becomes almost a paradox. To know who you are, I need to get more and more data about you. And where the verification industry has been headed in the past is that they've been asking about hard verification. So if you want to establish now, for example, an OnlyFans site to deliver adult services, they will ask you to pose with your face like this and your passport or some other thing so that they can verify that your face and your date of birth corresponds to your passport number that you've just held out for them. So this is largely the age verification technology. The problem with this kind of technology is it still takes my biometric, my passport detail, and gives it to some sort of processor. So this in somehow contradicts a little bit with all the principles of data minimization. I am trying to protect you from something, but at the same time, I'm collecting biometrics, even though I can claim I'm not collecting the biometrics an hour. So this was really the contradiction in the society, in this whole environment. That's where the technology that we've created and we've been working on for the past few years, which is based around a new way of doing machine learning on the device. And you must have heard it a lot. It's called Edge AI. Edge AI simply means I can run complex machine learning calculations and run complex classifiers on your device. I don't need to take your data to some sort of central server. So for example, if I can take your picture on my phone, and inside the phone, or let's say if it's an app, while I'm taking a picture, the app itself can decide, or the mobile device itself can decide that this is a 12-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 7-year-old, right? So that kind of using face and voice to determine someone's age can be done locally in the phone now. So the data processor themselves do not need to extract your biometrics and process them on a central server. And that sort of, to me, is a defining turning point in the way in which we make everything across the industry age aware. So if I downloaded an app, it needs to check initially how old are you without taking your data. And if that can be the case, then it automatically serves you either the right advertising, or if you are underage, does not serve you any advertising, has a different way of handling your data with data minimization and everything. Now, we've been working closely with the ICO that you mentioned. And so if you think the power of this technology to run within the device, it also takes on a number of things that that the speakers before me talked about. For example, empowering kids, using the same techniques to determine what an image is. That, for example, tackles some of the problems around CSAM. How is it someone takes a selfie and the intelligence in the phone is able to say, hey, that there's got nudity in the in this image, and it immediately tells the child, hey, do you really want to share it, because you can be in trouble. So that becomes a way to empower and educate the child. And this is a really new way of doing things. Now, there's the technology I'm talking to you has been deployed by us in the UK with the BBC, and around 60,000 kids are already using it. So it's quite new. In September this year, now you will have a wide implementation of the age verification design code, which means a lot of companies we are talking with or working with in the gaming sector, etc., will bring this technology into their onboarding process. So you onboard someone when you are making instead of saying, I am 12 years old or I'm 13, I will ask for your face and your voice. And with that little discussion, it will make a deduction on the phone without the owner of that game or data processor having any of that information, or any other third party having that information. It's a bit of software code that runs right on your device. And we think this is really a game changer in the way online safety, both online safety and age verification, will be affected in future. So those are my 2 cents purely from a technical point of view.
Thanks, Deepak. So Aditi, I also want to ask you one more thing. So there's been this discussion for the past few years, for example, let's say nutrition labels, okay, or privacy labels. So as Mr. Brijesh mentioned, okay, rather than having hundreds of pages of legalese which people like you or others may have written, pouring days and days and burning the midnight oil. But the fact is that except for those people, perhaps nobody else might be in a position to read. And even if they are reading, perhaps not being able to actually discern or make out anything out of it. Okay. So in that scenario, what are the roles that these nutrition labels or privacy labels type of concept can help? Is it helpful, let's say, for children's data protection specifically, rather than in general? In general, yes, there could be multiple scenarios, but in particular with children's data, are there some scenarios which you would like to share where this type of thing could be useful? And then I would also like to ask immediately after that, after your brief response, to Janice to sort of weigh in on the same issue, what you are saying, and then I want to have Janice's view in terms of would these type of things be also effective? Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Deepak Tewari. I think I always believe technology can move forward. You know, it can bring amazing solutions. And that's like marrying law with technology, and that is the output. And one of the initiatives has been made by, you know, these big tech companies, Apple and Google, I would say. Apple first, because they came out with a nutrition label, you know, introduction of nutrition labels. So they focus on 2 things. One is they focus on users getting information about what kind of you know, data is being collected. And as far as developers are concerned, it also helps them understand what all is expected from them as far as law is concerned. So nutrition label policy in the sense requires you to fill out lengthy detailed forms about what data you're collecting, what is the purpose of it, and, you know, give a large, like a satisfactory description of what you're going to do with the data. It propels developers to think responsibly. So that is a new way to look at it. And also another thing, just to ensure, like it goes a step ahead, you can say. So to ensure that privacy is implemented correctly, Apple has also introduced a new technology which disables cookie tracking. It specifically gives you that option, whether you want to be tracked or you don't want to be tracked. So these are some examples of good technologies that are being introduced. As far as focus on children is concerned, I think they might want to step up this effort, you know, might want to specifically focus on children. So I think there is scope for that. Deepak sir, there is scope for that, but I would just say right now, still, it is at a nascent stage where it is more about providing information to the users. And on that parameter, it perhaps satisfies the data protection laws.
So I think that's helpful. And by the way, so although Apple may have sort of started this whole thing earlier, but considering that in India, most of the people are all actually using Android phones, the good thing for us to see is that even Google has recently announced this type of thing, that they'll also come out with something similar. So Janice, yes, what's your take on this whole thing? I mean, suppose this type of information is available to parents, that, okay, that these are the type of information about children are being collected or not being collected while something is being used or in use or always or never and things like that. Would it go a little bit forward, at least in the sense of empowering the users, whether they are children or adults?
Right, so I pretty much echo what Aditi said. And just to add one aspect to this is the fact that all of us are fortunate to be working in this field. So we understand the significance of data. And when somebody says it's a commodity more valuable than oil, we agree. But unfortunately, a huge chunk of users in India, I'll be very contextual to India, people don't understand how valuable data is. People have actually asked me, Ari, even if you lose the data, what's the big deal? So that is the level of understanding that people have. So no matter how much technology, develops, no matter how much innovation is there in cyberspace, we will still have users who don't understand what they're consenting to. So when we talk about specific features, permissions that applications ask for, permissions, so let me give you an example of Candy Crush. It's a wonderful game, helps me and my family pass a lot of time, when we have holidays. So this game is a very simple game. You have to break candy. But they ask you for all kinds of permissions. They want your contacts, they want your camera, they want your location. Why are you showing me candy from Delhi? Not really. So it's a very ridiculous permission to ask for, but because we want to play the game, because we're so determined, we end up giving all permissions. So we have to start the conversation from here. I understand that, stakeholders, industry partners, absolutely, they have a responsibility and they're doing a great job. All these innovations that we just spoke about, it's wonderful. But are the users capable and skilled enough to understand the implications? That is one question that we have to ask ourselves. Therefore, for me, it comes back to awareness. It comes back to telling internet users what the significance of their data and digital footprint is. Something as simple as permissions manager, people are absolutely unaware. So these are things we have to talk about.
Thanks, Janice. And I know we are at 2:30 now, and I just wanted to request Dr. Patnaik for one particular thing. What is the mechanism that you see, Dr. Patnaik, in terms of what Mr. Gogoi had mentioned, in terms of having a greater alignment of what is happening under METI, for example, on the PDP bill, vis-a-vis what is happening by the Ministry of Health, or for that matter, Ministry of Women and Child, or Ministry of Home Affairs, or Ministry of Education. So one particular question to you, Dr. Patnaik, or if you have any other short closing comments from your side before you go back to the House. I think you're muted, Dr. Patnaik. Siddharth is, seems that Dr. Patnaik may have.
Yes, sir. I mean, perhaps we can move on to other speakers for now. Right. We can come down to Dr. Patnaik.
Okay, thanks. So I think he may have stepped out for a minute somewhere. So let me just ask Mr. Brijesh Singh now. When you're looking at these types of solutions, I mean, what's your take on these types of solutions, whether it's about age estimation or age verification, or the type of things that they just mentioned in terms of these nutrition levels, etc. Would these type of things be helpful in terms of creating awareness? Just a quick response from you, and then I'll go over to Deepak Tewari. I don't see him now here. So Deepak, one question to you is in terms of what is the level of confidence or what is the level of accuracy with these type of estimations? Are there particular cohorts, let's say a particular type of demographics or age when it is, or even in terms of gender perhaps, for example, in terms of facial recognition, that's been a lot of research around that. that some sort of demographics have been showing better accuracy compared to others. So what's the scenario in this type of technology?
Deepak, you're spot on. Actually, what's as you can imagine, machine learning is about training a machine. So it depends on where you get this fundamental data sets from. So typically data sets which have been available and which can be generated are much more historically, at least here in Europe, you see more and more technologies which have data sets from more represented groups. So there will always, the technology, the underlying technology is a bit less representative of another, which is where the role of having multiple signals comes. So maybe the face itself, sometimes it can misclassify someone as over an age or under an age, but then the voice plays as a second role. And now privately, we've also developed text-based estimation. So the way you write, the emojis you use, so these are different signals which indicate this is an adult or or a younger person. So you use multiple signals, and I cannot say the name, but we are also working with a pretty large gaming company which is looking at the way the actual console is used or the haptics are managed. So there are many signals which come, but they are the crux of it is it can be done very privately. And the second is it's already an order of magnitude above what happens when the alternative is it's a manual declaration of age. How old are you? So I'm 15, and okay, let's get in. This one I can share some numbers with you. The technology numbers we've seen with us and across a lot of other people is in the north of 80 to 90%. So with this level of accuracy, you are in a place to put it in an industrial industrial setting. Will it make a mistake? Yes, it will. Time to time, it will make mistakes, but that is, I mean, if you remember how you used Siri or some of these Alexa in the beginning, and they used to spew out a lot of nonsense. So there is a little bit of a learning curve for the industry, but I'm very happy to say that this technology is being quite widely deployed. You will see it in action over the next few months as the age-appropriate design code becomes enforceable in the UK on the 2nd of September 2020. So that's when everyone is scrambling to get it in place in Europe. So I'll be happy to provide more details to people who want more details.
Thank you for that. And with this, let me wrap up from my side. I would like to thank all the speakers, including, of course, Dr. Patnaik, Mr. Gogoi, Mr. Brijesh, Deepak, Janice, Aditi, all of you. And also the whole CUTS team, Amol, Siddharth, and everybody else that has been working behind the at the backdrop in terms of getting us all together today for this very important discussion. It's important for us to recognize that this particular discussion is, of course, it is happening at a particular point of time, and it is a crucial time by itself. But this is not the end all or be all of this type of thing. This is a long journey. It's an arduous journey, and we'll have many more co-travelers on this particular journey. The journey might be quite tough. I accept that and concede that, but I hope that after a little bit more of this journey, we'll have some better outcomes coming from this type of discussions, debates, and deliberations as we go further on. So with this, let me hand it over back to Siddharth now, who's also a research fellow in CUTS. And before I do that, I just want to sort of tilt the camera a little bit, because this is a particular t-shirt I deliberately chose today. So, okay. And yeah, I did that. So, okay, over to Siddharth.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Maheshwari, and many thanks to our eminent speakers and the participants for attending today's webinar. We had an insightful discussion today, and some of the points would also be useful for CUTS in framing its research agenda on the subject. If you notice on the chat box, I've just posted a link to a project brief. This is a study which has recently been initiated by CUTS. As a part of the project, we would be undertaking a survey of children as well as of parents on their perception, experience, expectations, etc. from data-driven digital technology-enabled services. So we would definitely like to get feedback from speakers and participants on any particular issue that they would like us to focus upon given that we are anyway conducting a survey and would be reaching out to many children and parents across the country. With this, we come to an end of this webinar. Thank you so much again for attending.